None of us think twice when we turn on the water in the shower, pick up food from the grocery store, or pour ourselves an ice-cold glass of water. Water, and the different sources it comes from, plays possibly the most essential role in our everyday lives, and most of the time it's something that we take for granted. Today we will be discussing the threats that humans pose to one main source of fresh water, aquifers. We will discuss agricultural practices as well as climate change to develop a full understanding of why it is so important to protect these resources. Because if we protect our aquifers, we protect our future. Let's begin by discussing the damages that agriculture has on groundwater resources. Fertilizers and pesticides have become the backbone of many agricultural practices today. Often these chemicals involve elements like nitrogen and phosphorus that can be very degrading for water. Unfortunately, these chemicals do not always stay within the bounds of the farmland because often farmland is overly concentrated with pesticides and fertilizers. They can run off into streams or seep extremely deep below the soil. As explained in 2001 by the two researchers Einerson and McKay, when these chemicals seep through the ground, it creates a plume of dissolved chemicals carried down gradient with flowing groundwater. Once this plume is deep enough to reach the aquifer, contamination does not stop until the source of contamination is cleaned up. Some chemicals are easily degraded by the natural filtration processes of the aquifer, while other chemicals persist and stay concentrated for decades to centuries. These chemicals have to be moved by filtration processes that are expensive, time-consuming, and at times inaccurate. Altogether, this means that water could become more expensive as well as dangerous if all the toxic chemicals are not filtered out. Some of the most common health concerns related to water contamination include gastrointestinal illnesses, reproductive issues, and neurological disorders, as explained by the CDC. There are many different types of pesticides and fertilizers that are available to farmers. Some of these types do not have any toxic chemicals nor any chemicals that have a chance of degrading groundwater. There are many food products that are produced in this manner, and often they're marketed as organic food to indicate this in grocery stores. We as consumers have enormous power in regard to encouraging and discouraging production practices. We have the ability to demand that farmers use sustainable, chemical-free fertilizers and pesticides that work just as well, sometimes better. By demanding this of farmers and the farming businesses, we would be ensuring stable prices of water in the future as well as safer water. Some may argue that the issue of groundwater degradation from agricultural practices is not something to be concerned about right now because of the lengthy amount of time that it will take for contaminants to reach the water supply and cause enough damage to harm the human population. Many people choose to ignore issues that are present and stoppable right now because it does not have a direct and immediate impact on their lives today. Not only is this way of thinking selfish and irresponsible, but it is also inaccurate when talking about aquifers. It is true that most of the damage to aquifers will be felt in the future, but many of the negative effects of irresponsible agricultural practices will be felt sooner rather than later. Going along with what was just discussed, climate change is one of, if not the biggest threat to our future that is constantly disregarded and pushed off by people because it, for the most part, does not have an immediate impact on our lives today. Despite this belief of many, it is important to discuss that aquifers face irreversible threats from the impacts of climate change, and these effects could be felt in the near future as well as in many generations. Contributors at the EPA conducted research on the extensive Ogallala Aquifer to try and predict how aquifer processes may change as the climates shift and change. What they concluded is that wet areas will get wetter and dry areas will get drier. And this means that the southern region of the Ogallala will experience the most negative impacts, including less recharge or different, less effective methods of recharge, stated by Meixner and his colleagues in 2016. This change in recharge is a result of drastic changes to the precipitation and evaporation processes of the water cycle. One, it will rain less, and two, surface water will evaporate faster, resulting in less water infiltration to the aquifer. The Ogallala currently provides nearly 30% of the irrigation water for all U.S. crops, making it a vital resource for our food. In order to protect water and food level consistency, humans need to take steps to get climate change under control. Another example comes from Germany, where Green and his colleagues in 2011 predicted that their main aquifer will experience a 30% decrease in overall recharge rates. The decline of the water table has been happening for decades, causing more and more money to be spent on aquifer water extraction, and this phenomenon will only be exaggerated as climate change takes its toll on the world. If we desire to live in a world where safe water is guaranteed, we must take action now. Governing bodies have the most power in taking steps to control climate change, as they have the ability to regulate the way in which businesses and corporations manufacture products. This means that we as a community must put pressure on our elected representatives to demand a change in how the issue of climate change is handled in government. We can also support environmentally sustainable produced products to make our voices heard through the economy. We have discussed the threats that irresponsible human actions and decisions pose to aquifer security in the near to distant future. It's important to discuss and understand these threats so that we as a community can be the change our planet and future generations deserve. We need to restore our groundwater resources, protect them indefinitely in the future in order to survive.